The Grand Leakin court fell silent the moment Annie Jason's trembling fingers touched the carved wolf-head armrest of the Alpha King's throne. The ancient wood beneath her hand pulsed with power, old magic, forbidden magic, the kind that hadn't been invoked in over a century. Golden runes flared to life along the throne's obsidian surface, illuminating the horrified faces of nobles and council members who understood exactly what she'd just done. Annie pressed herself harder against the throne's towering back, her healer's apprentice robes soaked with someone else's blood. Behind her, assassins disguised as palace guards prowled the edges of the throne room, their eyes locked on her like wolves circling wounded prey. She could still see the High Advisor's lifeless eyes staring at nothing, could still feel the warm spray of his blood across her hands when she tried, uselessly, to save him. She was a witness. A loose end. A girl with no wolf, no rank, no right to even breathe the same air as these powerful beings. And she just claimed sanctuary under the most dangerous creature in the realm. The Alpha King rose from his throne with terrifying grace, his towering form clad in dark leather and ceremonial armor that gleamed like liquid shadow in the firelight. Luke. The immortal king who'd ruled for 2 centuries without mercy, whose glowing eyes had witnessed empires crumble and enemies fall like wheat before a scythe, turned those eyes on her now. They burned gold. Pure, molten gold, like twin suns trapped behind a mortal face too beautiful and too cruel to be entirely human. The entire court held its breath. Then, before Annie could process what was happening, before she could run or apologize or beg for the quick death she deserved for her audacity, Luke reached behind the throne, his hand closing around her wrist with shocking gentleness. He pulled her forward, not roughly, but with inexorable strength, and settled her onto his lap as if she weighed nothing at all. His arm locked around her waist. Solid. Possessive. Warm in a way that made her entire body freeze with a different kind of fear. Luke leaned close, his breath hot against her ear, his voice a dark whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast throne room. You belong to me now. Chaos erupted. Hello, lovely listeners, **** before we dive deeper into this story of sanctuary, secrets, and a bond that will reshape an entire kingdom, I'd truly appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support helps me bring you more epic tales like this one. Now, let's jump into Annie's world. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when a powerless healer claims protection from the realm's most dangerous king. Annie Jason had lived her entire life as a shadow. Born without a wolf in a world ruled by lichens, she'd learned early that invisibility was survival. No shifting abilities meant no rank. No rank meant no voice. No voice meant she existed at the mercy of those who could tear her apart with a thought. So she'd become a healer's apprentice, a position that at least gave her purpose, even if it didn't give her power. She carried herbs, cleaned wounds, memorized remedies, and stayed silent when nobles spoke. She was useful enough to keep alive and unremarkable enough to ignore. She'd never expected more than that. Never dared to dream of more than a quiet life in the healing quarters, never touching the glittering, dangerous world of court politics and alpha bloodlines. But everything changed the night Master Callan sent her to deliver medicine to the Grand Leakin court during the autumn summit. The palace was breathtaking, all soaring columns and golden firelight, massive tapestries depicting ancient battles, and wolves who moved like living weapons draped in silk and ceremony. Annie had clutched her medicine bag tighter, keeping her eyes down, trying not to draw attention. The High Advisor's chambers were in the East Wing, far from the main festivities. When Annie knocked, she'd heard raised voices inside, urgent, angry, frightened. She should have left. Should have set the medicine outside the door and retreated. Instead, she'd pushed the door open just as the dagger plunged into the High Advisor's throat. Blood sprayed across ancient books and priceless artifacts. The High Advisor, a wolf who'd counseled kings for 3 generations, collapsed, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal, his hands clutching uselessly at the wound pumping his life onto the marble floor. The assassin had turned. Their eyes met. Annie ran. She didn't remember the route she took through the palace, only the pounding of her heart and the sound of boots behind her, heavy and fast and getting closer. Alarm bells began ringing. Fires erupted in the corridors, diversions, she realized dimly, meant to create chaos and cover the assassination. She burst into the throne room without thinking, without planning, driven only by blind panic and the primitive instinct to find someone, anyone who could stop the killers hunting her. The court was assembled, hundreds of nobles in their finest, gathered for some formal presentation she didn't understand. At the far end of the chamber, elevated on a dais of black stone and ancient oak, sat the throne itself. And on that throne, Luke, the Alpha King of the Lycans. Annie had never seen him up close. No one like her ever got that close. But even from across the vast chamber, his presence was overwhelming, power that made the air itself feel heavier, authority that needed no crown or ceremony to be absolute. She stumbled toward the throne, assassins bursting through the doors behind her, shouting for the guards to seize her, calling her a murderer, claiming she'd killed the High Advisor. The lie would work. Of course it would work. She was nobody, and they were palace guards with blood on their blades and authority in their voices. Annie's legs gave out at the base of the throne. She caught herself on the steps, crawled up them on hands and knees, and, because she had no other options, no other hope, nothing left to lose, she reached out and gripped the carved wolf head armrest. The throne responded. Golden light flared across obsidian and oak, ancient runes igniting in patterns that hadn't been seen in over a century. The entire hall fell silent, the chaos freezing mid-motion as every wolf present recognized what had just happened. Claim of wardship. A law older than the council itself, granting protection to any soul desperate enough to touch the Alpha King's throne and invoke his guardianship. A law that bound the king to defend the claimant, no matter who they were, no matter what they'd done. A law that Luke hadn't honored in over 100 years. Annie looked up, meeting those burning gold eyes for the first time, and whispered the words that would change everything. By the ancient law of sanctuary, I claim protection under the Alpha King's throne. For one terrible moment, Luke simply stared at her. His expression was unreadable, cold, calculating, perhaps annoyed that this powerless girl had just invoked a law he'd clearly hoped had been forgotten. Then he moved. Luke rose from his throne with devastating grace, his tall frame clad in black leather and ceremonial armor that caught the firelight like liquid shadow. He was beautiful in the way apex predators were beautiful, perfectly designed to kill, with a face too sharp and eyes too knowing to be entirely human. He reached behind the throne, his hand closing around her wrist. Not roughly. Not cruelly. But with a strength that told her very clearly. You are mine now, whether you understand what that means or not. He pulled her up and forward in one smooth motion, settling her onto his lap before the entire shocked court. His arm locked around her waist, solid and burning hot, holding her in place as if she might try to flee. As if she had anywhere to run. Luke leaned close, his breath warm against her ear, and spoke loud enough for every wolf in the chamber to hear. You belong to me now. The throne room erupted. Council members surged to their feet, shouting protests. The assassins, caught mid-lie, froze in the doorway, their faces paling as they realized they couldn't touch her now, couldn't drag her away for a convenient accident without declaring war on the Alpha King himself. And Annie, bleeding, terrified, pressed against the chest of the most dangerous being alive, felt the ancient magic of the throne settle around her like chains made of light. She was claimed, protected, bound. And she had absolutely no idea what she'd just done. Comment below where you're watching from, your country or state. I love connecting with listeners from all over the world. And if you're already hooked on Annie and Luke's story, smash that like button and let me know what you think is going to happen next, ***. Now, let's find out what it truly means to belong to a cursed king, ***. The council chamber descended into barely controlled chaos. High Elder Morvayn slammed his staff against the marble floor, the crack of wood on stone echoing like thunder. "Your Majesty, this is unprecedented. The girl is a witness to the High Advisor's murder. She must be questioned by the council, not hidden behind ancient laws that haven't been invoked in over a century." Luke remained seated on his throne, Annie still locked in his lap, his arm an unyielding band around her waist. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously soft. "The law is clear, Elder. She invoked sanctuary. I accept it. That makes her mine to question, not yours. She could be the assassin herself," a woman's voice rang out from the left side of the chamber. Lady Ravenna, her silver hair braided with ceremonial beads, her eyes sharp with calculation. A convenient witness who flees to the throne room covered in the victim's blood. It reeks of deception. Annie's breath caught. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but Luke's fingers tightened warningly against her ribs. "If she were the assassin," Luke said, his tone almost bored, "she would have fled the palace entirely, not run directly to me and invoke a law that binds her to my side indefinitely. Your logic fails you, Lady Ravenna." From the back of the chamber, a figure emerged from the shadows, and Annie felt Luke's entire body tense beneath her. The man was tall, powerfully built, with dark hair streaked with silver and eyes that gleamed like polished steel. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything. Alpha Marek, leader of the Northern Territories, second only to Luke in power and influence. "Your Majesty," Marek's voice was smooth, conciliatory, but Annie heard the edge beneath it. "No one questions your right to grant sanctuary. However, the High Advisor's death affects all territories. Surely the girl can be questioned by neutral parties. I volunteer my own counsel to conduct the investigation." How generous. Luke's words dripped with contempt. "Tell me, Marek, why would I hand over my ward to the very wolves who stand to gain most from political instability?" Marek's jaw tightened. "You dare suggest?" "I suggest nothing. I simply observe that the High Advisor was murdered hours before he was set to present evidence of territorial treaty violations. Violations your pack has been accused of for the past 6 months." Luke shifted slightly, and Annie felt the raw power radiating from him, barely leashed. "The girl stays with me. That is final." The silence that followed was suffocating. Annie could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, measuring, calculating, deciding whether she was worth the political warfare that Luke had just declared on her behalf. Finally, Morvayn bowed stiffly. "As you command, Your Majesty." But the council formally requests regular reports on the investigation. The High Advisor's death cannot go unanswered. And it won't. Luke stood, lifting Annie with him as if she weighed nothing. She stumbled slightly when her feet touched the ground, her legs weak with exhaustion and terror. His hand moved to the small of her back, steadying her. "Court is dismissed. Anyone found near my private wing without explicit permission will be considered a threat and dealt with accordingly." The dismissal was absolute. Nobles filed out, their whispers rising like a swarm of insects the moment they thought they were out of earshot. Annie caught fragments, powerless girl, political game, won't last the week. Marek was the last to leave, his steel eyes locked on Annie with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Interesting choice, Your Majesty. I wonder if you know what you've truly claimed. Luke's response was a low growl that raised every hair on Annie's arms. Marek smiled. Cold, calculating, and disappeared into the corridor. The moment the doors closed, Luke's hand dropped from her back. Walk. Annie's legs obeyed before her mind could process the command. She followed him through corridors she'd never seen, past guards who pressed themselves against walls as their king passed, up a spiral staircase carved from black stone that seemed to absorb the torchlight rather than reflect it. The king's private wing was nothing like she'd imagined. No opulent throne rooms or glittering treasure. Instead, the chambers were austere, almost monastic, dark wood, stone walls, weapons mounted like art, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the moonlit forest beyond the palace. Luke moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He held one out to her. Drink. Annie's hands shook as she took the glass. The first sip burned her throat, but warmth spread through her chest, dulling the sharp edges of panic. Your Majesty, What did you see? Luke interrupted, leaning against the desk, his arms crossed. In the dim light, his eyes still glowed faintly, gold on gold, and Annie realized with a start that it wasn't just emotion or power. It was something else. Something constant. The High Advisor, she managed, her voice hoarse. He was in his chambers. I heard shouting before I entered. When I opened the door, her throat closed. Someone stabbed him. The dagger went through his throat. There was so much blood. Did you see the assassin's face? Annie shook her head. They wore a hood. Dark clothing. But they moved like a wolf, fast, trained. When they saw me, I ran. Luke's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those glowing eyes. The guards who chased you. Did you recognize any of them? No. They weren't wearing standard palace uniforms. The insignia was wrong, a broken moon instead of the full crest. Mercenaries, then. Luke straightened, pacing to the window. Hired to ensure there were no witnesses. Which means this wasn't a crime of passion. It was planned, executed, and covered by wolves with resources and authority. Annie set her glass down before she dropped it. Why did you accept my claim? You could have let them take me. I'm nobody. A healer's apprentice with no wolf, no family, no. Do you know what the claim of wardship actually means? Luke turned to face her, and in the moonlight streaming through the windows, he looked almost inhuman. Beautiful and terrible in equal measure. It's not simply protection. It's binding. You invoked an oath older than this kingdom, older than the council, older than the bloodlines that rule the territories. He moved closer, and Annie forced herself not to retreat. The moment you touched my throne and spoke those words, you became mine. Not metaphorically. Not politically. Mine. Your life is tied to my will. You cannot leave my protection without my permission. You cannot refuse my commands. You belong to me as completely as my weapons, my guards, my very shadow. Annie's blood ran cold. I didn't know. Ignorance doesn't unmake oaths. Luke's voice softened slightly, but the intensity didn't fade. You came to me seeking salvation from wolves who wanted you dead. I gave it to you. But salvation has a price, little healer. And you will pay it for as long as I choose to keep you. How long? The question escaped before she could stop it. Luke's smile was sharp. I haven't granted wardship in over 100 years. The last person I claimed served me for 63 years before I released them. So you'd better hope you're useful, Annie Jason. Because if you're not, you'll spend the rest of your very short life wishing I'd let those assassins have you. The words should have terrified her. Should have sent her running, though she apparently couldn't run anymore, bound as she was by laws she didn't understand. Instead, Annie met his glowing gaze and said, I can be useful. I saw something else. Before the assassin struck, there was a symbol on the dagger's hilt. A wolf's head with 3 claw marks through the eye. Luke went very still. You're certain? I'm a healer. I'm trained to observe details. It was there. For the first time since she'd met him, Luke looked genuinely surprised. That symbol hasn't been used in 30 years. It belonged to a disbanded pack, one that was executed for attempting to overthrow my rule. Then someone's bringing them back, Annie said quietly. Luke stared at her for a long moment, something calculating shifting behind those impossible eyes. Perhaps you will be useful after all. He gestured to a door on the left. Your chambers. Don't leave them without permission. Don't speak to anyone without my approval. And don't, under any circumstances, trust anyone in this palace. Not the guards. Not the servants. And especially not the council. What about you? Annie asked before she could think better of it. Should I trust you? Luke's laugh was low and dark. No, little healer. You shouldn't. But you're bound to me now, so trust is irrelevant. Obedience is all that matters. He turned away, dismissing her, and Annie retreated to the chambers he'd indicated. The room was simple but clean, a bed, a wash basin, a window overlooking the courtyard below. She collapsed onto the bed, her entire body shaking with exhaustion. She must have dozed, because when she woke, the room was darker. The moon had risen higher, casting silver shadows across the floor. And Luke's eyes were glowing brighter. She could see the light beneath his door, gold and pulsing like a heartbeat. She heard his breathing, rough, pained, as if he were fighting something invisible. A curse, she realized. He'd said his rule spanned 2 centuries, but no wolf lived that long naturally. Whatever kept him alive also hurt him. Annie pressed her ear to the door, listening. The sounds grew worse, a growl, a crash, the scrape of claws on stone. Then, silence. Too much silence. Annie's instincts screamed at her to stay hidden, to obey his command and remain in her chambers. But she was a healer, and that sound, that pain, called to something deeper than fear. She eased the door open. The sitting room was empty, but Luke's chamber door stood ajar. Through the gap, she saw him standing by the window, his back to her, his hands braced against the frame. His shoulders heaved with each breath, and his eyes, reflected in the glass, burned like twin suns. She took one step forward. The window shattered. A figure in black lunged through the broken glass, blade gleaming, aimed directly at Annie's throat. She didn't even have time to scream. Luke moved. One moment he was across the room. The next, he was between her and the assassin, his hand closing around the attacker's throat with crushing force. The blade clattered to the floor. Who sent you? Luke's voice was barely human, more growl than words. The assassin choked, trying to speak, but Luke's grip tightened. There was a sickening crack, and the body went limp. Luke dropped it carelessly, turning to face Annie. His eyes were fully gold now, no white remaining, and his teeth had lengthened into fangs. He looked every inch the monster the legends claimed him to be. "I told you to stay in your chambers," he said softly. Annie's back hit the wall. "I heard you, I thought. You thought you could help." Luke stalked closer, and Annie realized with cold clarity that she was trapped between a predator and stone. "I don't need help, little healer. I need obedience. The next time you disobey me, I might not be able to stop myself from treating you like the threat you appear to be." He leaned in close, his breath hot against her face, his eyes burning into hers. "Welcome to your new life, Annie Jason. Sleep well. You're going to need your strength. Because tomorrow, you start learning exactly what it means to belong to a cursed king." The palace whispered. Annie heard it in the way servants fell silent when she passed, in the sidelong glances from guards stationed outside Luke's wing, in the carefully blank expressions of nobles who'd once looked through her as if she didn't exist. Now they saw her, oh, they saw her, and their attention felt like a physical weight pressing against her skin. "The powerless healer," she heard someone murmur in the corridor outside the library. "Can you imagine? No wolf, no rank, and she sits on the Alpha King's lap before the entire court." "I give her a month," another voice responded. "Luke hasn't kept a ward in a century. She'll bore him, or worse, disappoint him. Then she'll disappear like all the others who thought they could claim his protection." Annie kept her eyes down, her hands steady on the stack of medical texts she'd been granted permission to retrieve. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. She had bigger concerns than court gossip. Like the fact that her new master was cursed. 3 nights she'd spent in the king's private wing, and 3 nights she'd woken to the sound of his agony. It started after midnight, always after midnight, as if whatever tormented him waited for the moon to reach its peak before striking. His breathing would turn ragged, punctuated by growls that sounded more animal than human. Furniture crashed. Glass shattered. And through it all, that golden light leaked from beneath his door, pulsing like a dying star. The servants who delivered her meals wouldn't meet her eyes when she asked about it. The guards stationed at the wing's entrance simply stared straight ahead, as if they'd been carved from stone. No one spoke of the Alpha King's curse. But everyone knew it existed. On the 4th night, Annie lay awake, listening. The sounds were worse tonight. Not just pain, but something that sounded like grief, raw and endless. She pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block it out, but the anguish seeped through anyway, burrowing into her chest until her own heart ached in sympathy. A crash, louder than the others. The sound of claws raking across stone. Then silence. The kind of silence that felt like death. Annie's healer instincts overrode her self-preservation. She slipped from her bed, pulled a robe over her thin nightdress, and eased her door open. The sitting room was dark except for the golden light bleeding from Luke's chambers, casting strange shadows that seemed to writhe across the walls. His door stood open. She should turn back. Should return to her chambers and pretend she'd heard nothing, seen nothing. Luke had made it clear what he expected: obedience, silence, invisibility except when he summoned her. But the healer in her couldn't ignore suffering. Annie crossed the sitting room on silent feet, stopping at the threshold of his chambers. What she saw made her breath catch. Luke stood in the center of the room, shirtless, his powerful frame rigid with tension. His eyes blazed pure gold, no trace of white, no hint of humanity. Blood dripped from his hands where his claws had emerged and dug into his own palms. Around him, the room lay in ruins. Furniture overturned, mirrors shattered, deep gouges carved into the stone walls. But it was his face that stopped her heart. The anguish there, the horror, the endless torment playing across features that seemed caught between man and beast. "No," he whispered, his voice broken. "Please. Not again. Not again." He was staring at something only he could see, his body trembling, his chest heaving. The scent of blood hung heavy in the air, not real blood, Annie realized. Phantom blood. A memory so powerful it manifested in the physical world. Luke's knees buckled. He caught himself against the windowsill, his claws scoring deep marks in the wood. "I'm sorry," he gasped to the empty air. "Father, I'm sorry. I couldn't stop. I tried to stop. I tried." The grief in his voice was unbearable. Annie moved without thinking. She crossed the room, her bare feet crunching on broken glass, and reached out to touch his shoulder. The moment her fingers made contact with his skin, everything changed. The golden light flared blindingly bright, then suddenly dimmed. Luke's entire body went rigid under her hand, his head snapping around to stare at her with those burning eyes. For one terrible second, Annie thought he might kill her. She could see the beast in him, the predator, the thing that wanted blood. Then he shuddered, and the gold in his eyes flickered. "Annie." Her name came out hoarse, confused, as if he were waking from a nightmare he couldn't quite shake. She kept her hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremors running through his powerful frame. "You were trapped," she said softly. "In whatever you were seeing. You couldn't get out." Luke stared at her, his expression shifting through shock, confusion, and something that looked almost like fear. "How did you?" He broke off, looking down at where her small hand rested against his bare skin. "No one can touch me during an episode. The beast doesn't recognize friend from foe." "I'm not your friend," Annie said, surprised by her own boldness. "I'm your ward." "Maybe that's different." Luke's laugh was bitter. "A ward who's only been bound to me for 4 days shouldn't be able to calm a curse that's lasted 2 centuries. He pulled away from her touch, and Annie felt the loss of his heat like a physical ache. "You should go. Now. Before I lose control again." But Annie had spent her life reading bodies, understanding pain. And what she saw in Luke's face wasn't violence or rage. It was vulnerability, carefully hidden beneath layers of authority and terror. "What do you see?" she asked quietly. "When the curse takes you?" Luke's jaw tightened. "That's none of your concern. I'm a healer. Pain is always my concern. You can't heal this." His voice was flat, final. "No one can. I've had the best healers, the most powerful witches, the wisest sages in all the territories examine me. The curse is bound to my immortality. The only way to break it is to die." He moved to the sideboard, pouring himself a drink with hands that still trembled slightly. The gold in his eyes had faded to a dull amber, but Annie could see the exhaustion in every line of his body. "The assassination," Annie said, changing tactics. "The symbol on the dagger. Have you learned anything?" Luke's expression hardened. The broken moon insignia belonged to mercenaries hired by someone with considerable resources. The High Advisor was investigating territorial violations, treaty breaches, and signs of insurrection. Someone wanted him dead before he could present his findings to the council. Alpha Marek. Perhaps. Luke drained his glass. But Marek is too smart to leave such obvious traces. If he's involved, he's buried his connection deep. He turned to face her fully. "Which brings me to you. Someone sent an assassin through my window 4 nights ago. Someone who knew exactly which chambers you occupied. Someone inside the palace is feeding information to our enemies. Annie's stomach twisted. You think the council? I think the council wants me dead or deposed. They tolerate my rule because I'm powerful enough to hold the territories together, but they despise the fact that I won't bend to their political games. A powerless girl invoking ancient sanctuary makes me look weak. Sentimental. Which makes this the perfect time to move against me. He set the glass down with controlled precision. Tomorrow, you'll accompany me to the archives. There are texts there, old ones, dating back to before the territories were unified. If the Broken Moon mercenaries are truly returning, there may be information about who originally led them and why they were executed. Annie nodded, her mind already racing. Your Majesty, may I ask you something? Luke's expression suggested he'd rather she didn't, but he inclined his head. Why haven't you granted wardship in 100 years? What changed? For a long moment, Luke simply stared at her, his amber eyes unreadable. Then, surprising her completely, he answered. The last person I claimed as my ward was a young soldier who'd witnessed corruption in his own pack. He came to me seeking justice, and I granted him protection. Luke's voice went cold. 3 months later, he was found dead in his chambers. Poisoned. The investigation revealed that granting him wardship had made him a target. Enemies wanted to prove I couldn't protect even those directly under my guard. His death was meant to humiliate me, to show the territories that my power had limits. Annie felt her throat tighten. So you stopped claiming wards to protect them. I stopped because I learned that sometimes protection is just another form of target. Luke moved toward her, and Annie forced herself not to retreat. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Which is why you need to understand something, Annie Jason. I accepted your claim because the alternative was letting you die in that throne room. But every moment you remain under my protection, you become more valuable to my enemies. They'll try to use you against me. They'll try to kill you to prove a point. And when they do, I might not be able to stop them. Then teach me to protect myself, Annie said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. I'm not helpless. I'm a healer, I know anatomy, weak points, how bodies work. Train me. Luke's eyes flickered with something that might have been respect. You think you can learn to fight in time to matter? I think I'm already in the middle of a war whether I'm trained or not. I'd rather face it with knowledge than ignorance. A ghost of a smile touched Luke's lips. Very well. Training begins at dawn. Don't be late. He turned away, dismissing her, but Annie didn't move. Your Majesty. What do you see? In your nightmares? Luke's shoulders tensed. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I see the night I killed my family. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Not by choice, he continued, still not looking at her. A witch cursed me. Bound me to immortality and forced me to relive their massacre every night for eternity. I was the weapon. They were the victims. And I remember every scream, every drop of blood, every moment of their terror as I tore them apart. Annie's hand flew to her mouth. How long? 217 years. Luke finally turned, and the ancient grief in his eyes was staggering. Every single night, I watch myself murder them. Feel their blood on my hands. Hear my father begging me to stop. And I can't. The curse won't let me look away, won't let me forget. It's my punishment for something I couldn't control, an eternal reminder that I'm a monster wearing a king's crown. You're not a monster, Annie whispered. Luke's laugh was hollow. You touched me during an episode and survived. That doesn't make me less of a beast. It makes you remarkably fortunate. He moved past her toward the door. Go to bed, Annie. Tomorrow will be difficult enough without you losing sleep over a curse you can't fix. But as Annie returned to her chambers, her mind raced. A witch's curse. Immortality bound to torment. A massacre replayed every night for over 2 centuries. There had to be a way to break it. Had to be something in the archives, some fragment of knowledge that could help. Because she'd felt something when she touched him during that episode. Not just his pain, but a resonance. As if her presence had disrupted the curse itself, if only for a moment. The next morning, Annie woke before dawn and dressed quickly in the simple training clothes that had been left outside her door. When she emerged from her chambers, Luke was already waiting, dressed in black leather that emphasized his powerful frame. His eyes were their normal gold-flecked amber, but she could see the exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. "Keep up," was all he said before striding toward the door. The archives were deep beneath the palace, accessible only through a series of winding staircases that seemed to descend into the mountain itself. The air grew cooler as they descended, and Annie could smell old parchment, dust, and something else, magic, faint but persistent, woven into the very stones. Luke pushed open a massive door, revealing a chamber that took Annie's breath away. Shelves stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow, packed with books and scrolls so old they seemed ready to crumble at a touch. Light crystals embedded in the walls cast a soft blue glow across everything. "The Royal Archives," Luke said. "Every significant event in the territory's history is recorded here. Treaties, wars, bloodlines, curses." He moved to a section in the far corner. "Start here. Look for anything related to the Broken Moon mercenaries or rebellions from 30 years ago." They worked in silence for hours, pulling down dusty tomes and scanning faded texts. Annie's eyes burned from reading, but she pushed on, searching for anything that might help. It was nearly noon when she found it. "Your Majesty." Annie's voice was hushed, reverent, as she stared at the page before her. "I found something. About curses." Luke was at her side instantly, reading over her shoulder. The text was ancient, written in a dialect Annie could barely decipher, but certain words stood out: bloodline, Evershade, Cursebreaker. The Evershade line, Luke read aloud. A bloodline thought extinct, capable of breaking or binding immortal curses through blood magic. His voice went sharp. "Where did you find this?" "It was misfiled in the rebellion records." "But look, it says the Evershade descendants were hunted down and killed 2 generations ago because their power was too dangerous. Witches feared them. Alphas feared them. So they were eliminated. All of them." Annie's hands shook as she turned the page. The text says the last known Evershade was a healer named Mara Jason, who died in childbirth. Her daughter's fate is unknown. The silence that followed was deafening. "Jason," Luke said slowly. "Your surname." Annie looked up at him, her heart pounding. "It's a common name. Lots of wolves." "How much do you know about your mother?" "Nothing. I was raised by the Healers Guild. They said I was orphaned as an infant." Annie's voice trembled. "I always assumed my parents were nobody. Powerless, like me." Luke's expression had gone calculating, intense. "If you're Evershade." He trailed off, then cursed softly. "That's why someone wants you dead. Not because you witnessed the assassination. Because of what you are." "I don't have any power," Annie protested. "I've never been able to shift, never shown any magical ability." Dormant bloodlines can remain hidden for years, sometimes generations. But they're still there, waiting for the right trigger. Luke's hand closed around her wrist, his touch burning hot. "Annie, if you truly are Evershade, your blood could either break my curse, or make it infinitely worse." Before Annie could respond, footsteps echoed in the archives. They both turned as an elderly man emerged from between the shelves. Master Elian, the palace sage, his white beard reaching his chest, his eyes milky with age but still sharp with intelligence. "Forgive the intrusion, your majesty." Elian bowed stiffly. "But I overheard your conversation, and I must speak." Luke's voice went cold. "You were spying, sage." "I was researching, as I do every day." "But yes, I heard." Elian moved closer, his gaze fixed on Annie. "Child, describe the symbol you saw on the assassination dagger." "Every detail." Annie did, and watched the color drain from Elian's face. "The broken moon with 3 claw marks through the eye," Elian whispered. "That's not just a mercenary symbol. It's the mark of the Evershade hunters, wolves hired specifically to eliminate the bloodline. If they've returned, it means someone knows what you are before you do." Luke's grip on Annie's wrist tightened. "How is that possible?" "Blood calls to blood," Elian said grimly. "If Annie is truly Evershade, her presence in the palace would resonate with any magical artifacts or enchantments tied to that lineage. Someone with the right knowledge could detect her." His eyes met Luke's. "Your Majesty, the curse that binds you was created by the witch Morvana, who died 2 centuries ago. But her grimoire survived. If it's fallen into the wrong hands, they could use Annie to strengthen the curse," Luke finished, his voice deadly soft. "Or force her to break it in a way that kills you both." Elian bowed again. "The girl is in grave danger. As are you, your Majesty. The Evershade bloodline is powerful, but untrained, it's as dangerous to the bearer as to those around her." Luke released Annie's wrist and stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, sage. You may go." Elian hesitated, then withdrew, leaving them alone among the ancient texts. Annie's mind reeled. Evershade. A bloodline capable of breaking curses. Hunters who wanted her dead. A dormant power she'd never known she possessed. "I don't understand," she whispered. "If I have this power, why hasn't it manifested? Why am I still powerless?" Luke turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. "Perhaps because you've never been close to a curse as old and powerful as mine. Or perhaps because the trigger hasn't occurred yet." He moved closer. "When you touched me last night, during the episode, what did you feel?" Annie struggled to find words. "Heat. And something else. Like recognition. As if my body knew yours, knew the curse, knew how to." She broke off as Luke's hand cupped her face, his touch gentle but firm. His eyes had gone gold again, not from rage or curse, but from something else entirely. Something that made her breath catch. "This is dangerous," he said softly. "If you're truly Evershade, every moment you spend near me could trigger your power. And if it awakens uncontrolled." He didn't finish, but Annie understood. Uncontrolled power could kill them both. "Then teach me to control it," Annie said, her voice steady despite her terror. "You said you'd train me. Train me in this too." Luke's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Annie felt heat flood through her at the touch. "You don't know what you're asking." "I'm asking to survive. To help you survive. That's what wards do, isn't it? Serve their king." Something dark and wanting flashed in Luke's eyes. "Is that what you think this is?" Service? Annie's heart hammered. What else would it be? Luke leaned closer, his breath warm against her lips. Something far more dangerous than either of us anticipated. Then he released her and stepped back, the professional mask sliding back into place. We returned to my chambers. Now. If the Evershade hunters are in the palace, nowhere is safe. But at least in my wing, I can protect you. As they climbed the stairs back to the surface, Annie's mind churned. She wasn't powerless. She'd never been powerless. She was Evershade, a bloodline so dangerous it had been hunted to extinction. And somehow, impossibly, she was bound to the one being in the realm whose curse she might be able to break. Or die trying. If you're hooked on Annie and Luke's story and want to know what happens next, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Comment below with your theories. Do you think Annie can break Luke's curse, or will her awakening power destroy them both? And don't forget to like this chapter if you're Team Annie and Luke. Trust me, what's coming next will blow your mind. The summons came at dawn. A formal scroll delivered by 3 armed guards, sealed with the council's crimson wax. Annie's hands trembled as she broke the seal and read the words that might as well have been a death sentence. Annie Jason, ward of the Alpha King, you are hereby summoned to appear before the Grand Council to answer charges of conspiracy, murder, and treason against the crown. Failure to appear will result in immediate revocation of sanctuary and arrest. They can't do this, Annie whispered, looking up at Luke. He stood by the window, already dressed in full ceremonial armor, black leather and steel that made him look like a weapon forged in shadow. His eyes were hard, unreadable. They can. They are. Luke's voice was cold, controlled. The council has been looking for an excuse to move against me since the moment you invoked sanctuary. Now they think they have one. But I didn't kill the High Advisor. I witnessed his murder. Truth is irrelevant in political games, Annie. What matters is perception, power, and timing. Luke turned to face her. They'll present evidence, fabricated or twisted to serve their narrative. They'll paint you as an ambitious girl who killed to gain access to power. And they'll use your connection to me as proof that I've grown weak, sentimental, unfit to rule. Annie's stomach twisted. So what do we do? Luke's smile was sharp and entirely humorless. We go to court. And we remind them exactly who they're dealing with. The Grand Council chamber was packed. Every noble family, every territorial representative, every wolf with enough rank to demand entrance had crowded into the massive hall. Annie felt their eyes on her like physical weight as she walked beside Luke down the central aisle, her simple gray dress a stark contrast to the jewels and finery surrounding them. The council sat on an elevated platform at the far end. 7 elders in crimson robes, their faces ranging from stern disapproval to barely concealed satisfaction. High Elder Morvain occupied the center position, his gray beard braided with silver beads that caught the light from the massive chandeliers overhead. Alpha Marek stood to the side, his steel-gray eyes tracking Annie's every movement. He wore formal armor too, dark green trimmed with silver, the colors of the Northern Territories. Several other territorial alphas flanked him, their expressions equally hostile. This wasn't just a trial. It was a coup in the making. Luke guided Annie to stand before the council, his hand a firm presence at the small of her back. When he removed it, she felt suddenly, terribly exposed. Morvain's staff struck the marble floor with a resounding crack. This emergency session of the Grand Council is convened. Annie Jason, you stand accused of the murder of High Advisor Telmarin and conspiracy to undermine the stability of this realm. How do you answer these charges? Annie's voice came out steadier than she felt. Not guilty, High Elder. I witnessed the High Advisor's murder. I did not commit it. Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Morvaine's expression didn't change. Lady Ravenna, present your evidence. The silver-haired noblewoman stepped forward, holding a leather folder. The evidence is damning, Your Grace. First, the witness testimony. She pulled out a document and read aloud. Guard Captain Torvald states that on the night in question, he saw Annie Jason leaving the High Advisor's chambers at the time of death, her clothing stained with blood. When he attempted to question her, she fled. Because assassins were chasing me, Annie protested. They killed the High Advisor and tried to kill me as a witness. Yet no bodies of these alleged assassins have been found, Ravenna continued smoothly. Furthermore, we have testimony from the Healers Guild stating that Annie Jason had been expressing frustration with her lowly position for months. She'd been heard saying she wanted more, deserved more, than the life of a servant. Annie's face flushed. I said I wanted to learn more advanced healing techniques. That's not the same as. And most damning of all, Ravenna's voice rose, cutting her off, is the fact that within moments of the murder, she invoked ancient sanctuary laws to bind herself to the Alpha King. A convenient way to ensure she couldn't be properly questioned or punished for her crimes. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Annie felt the narrative closing around her like a noose. Every fact had been twisted, every innocent statement reframed as evidence of guilt. This is absurd, Luke's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The chamber fell silent. Annie Jason is a healer with no combat training, no pack affiliation, and no political connections. You expect this court to believe she somehow managed to kill a High Advisor who'd survived 3 centuries of political intrigue, escaped trained guards, and then had the presence of mind to invoke a law so obscure most wolves have forgotten it exists. Morvaine's eyes narrowed. Your Majesty, your defense of the accused is noted. However, it also raises questions about your own judgment. You granted sanctuary to a murder suspect without investigation. You've kept her in your private chambers. You've refused counsel access to question her properly. Some might say your behavior suggests compromised judgment. The words hung in the air like poison. Compromised, Luke repeated softly, and something in his tone made every wolf in the chamber tense. You dare suggest I am compromised, Elder? Not I, Your Majesty, Morvaine said carefully. But there are concerns. Your curse has been worsening. The episodes are more frequent, more violent. Palace staff report hearing screams from your chambers nightly. And now you've bound yourself to a girl accused of treason. He paused. Some on the council wonder if the curse has finally affected your ability to rule effectively. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Luke descended the steps from the raised platform where they'd been standing, moving with predatory grace toward the council seats. Every guard in the chamber tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Let me be absolutely clear, Luke said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Annie Jason is innocent. The evidence against her is fabricated by wolves who wanted the High Advisor dead and needed a scapegoat. Someone with resources and authority hired mercenaries bearing the Broken Moon insignia, a symbol that hasn't been used in 30 years. Someone orchestrated not just murder, but a political attack designed to destabilize my rule. He stopped directly before the council, and Annie saw several elders actually lean back in their seats. You want to question my judgment? Fine. Let's discuss judgment. Let's discuss how 3 council members have accepted bribes from Northern Territories over the past year. How treaty violations have been ignored when they benefited certain families. How the High Advisor's investigation into corruption was blocked at every turn by this very council. Morvaine's face had gone pale. Those are serious accusations, Your Majesty. And you have evidence to support them? Alpha Marek stepped forward, his voice smooth. Or are these merely deflections to protect your ward? Luke turned to face Marek, and Annie saw something predatory flash in his eyes. I have evidence. The High Advisor kept meticulous records, and his chambers weren't the only place he stored them. But that's not what this is really about, is it, Marek? The Northern Alpha's jaw tightened. I don't know what you mean. This trial, the accusations, the convenient timing, it's all theater. You want me gone. You want the throne. Luke's voice dropped to a dangerous purr. So why don't you stop hiding behind fabricated charges and say it directly? The chamber went deathly silent. Marek smiled, cold, calculating. Very well. Since you forced the issue. He turned to address the full assembly. I, Alpha Marek of the Northern Territories, formally challenge Luke's fitness to rule. His curse makes him unstable, dangerous, and incapable of providing the steady leadership our realm requires. The evidence is everywhere. Violent episodes, compromised judgment, attachment to a murder suspect. The Alpha King has become a liability. Gasps and shouts erupted throughout the chamber. Annie felt her blood turn to ice. This was it. The coup they'd been building toward. I second the challenge. Another Alpha stepped forward, Saren of the Eastern Territories, his weathered face grim. The curse must be addressed. For the good of the realm. One by one, 4 more territorial Alphas stepped forward, each adding their voice to the challenge. Only 2 remained silent, their expressions conflicted. Morvaine stood, his voice grave. The challenge has been issued and seconded. Alpha Luke, by council law, you have 1 month to prove your fitness to rule or face a formal vote of no confidence. If the council votes against you, you will be required to abdicate and submit to judgment for any crimes committed during your reign. Luke's expression didn't change, but Annie felt rage radiating from him like heat from a forge. And Annie Jason will remain in custody pending the resolution of her trial, Morvaine said. She cannot stay in your chambers during this process. It would be improper. She's my ward. Under ancient law. Ancient law is being reviewed by council scholars, Ravenna interrupted. There are questions about whether wardship can supersede criminal charges. Until those questions are resolved, she'll be held in the palace cells for her own protection. Her own protection. The words were a mockery, and everyone knew it. Luke's hand moved to his sword, and for a terrible moment, Annie thought he might actually draw it. Violence crackled in the air between him and the council, thick enough to taste. Then he turned, his eyes meeting Annie's. What she saw there made her chest tighten, fury, frustration, and something that looked almost like apology. Annie Jason remains under my protection, Luke said flatly. She stays in my chambers. If any wolf tries to remove her, I will consider it an act of war against my authority. Is that clear enough for you, Morvaine? The High Elder's expression went rigid. Your Majesty, you cannot. I am still Alpha King. You've challenged my fitness, but until that challenge is resolved, my word is law. She stays. Luke's eyes blazed gold. Now get out. All of you. This session is over. For a moment, no one moved. Then Morvaine nodded stiffly and struck his staff against the floor. This council stands adjourned. The nobles filed out, their whispers rising to a roar the moment they reached the corridors. Marek was the last to leave, pausing at the doorway to look back at Luke with something that might have been pity. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Marek said quietly. "Let her go. Prove you can still put duty before sentiment. It's the only way you'll survive this." "Get out," Luke growled. When they were finally alone, Luke's entire body sagged. He moved to one of the stone benches lining the chamber and sat heavily, his head falling into his hands. Annie approached cautiously, unsure whether to offer comfort or stay silent. "They're going to kill me," Luke said, his voice muffled. "Not in combat. That would be too honest. They'll use the curse. Wait for an episode severe enough that I can't defend myself, then claim I died naturally or had to be put down for everyone's safety." Annie sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "We'll find a way to fight this. There is no fighting this. The challenge is legitimate. The council has every legal right to question my fitness." Luke lifted his head, and Annie saw exhaustion in every line of his face. "I've ruled for 2 centuries, Annie. 200 years of holding territories together through wars, famines, plagues, and rebellions. I've made hard choices, brutal choices. I've killed more wolves than I can count. And now they want me gone because I showed mercy to a girl who begged for sanctuary." "No," Annie said firmly. "They want you gone because you're investigating their corruption. Because you won't be controlled. The curse is just their excuse." Luke's laugh was bitter. "The curse is very real. And it's getting worse. Last night I nearly shifted completely. If you hadn't been there." He trailed off, then looked at her sharply. "Why did you come to my chambers? I told you to stay away during episodes. You were in pain. I'm always in pain. This was different." Annie held his gaze. "I heard you begging. Apologizing to people who weren't there. And I couldn't just lie in bed and pretend I didn't hear it." Something cracked in Luke's expression. "You should have. You should stay as far from me as possible when the curse takes hold. I could kill you, Annie. I've killed before during episodes. Guards who got too close, servants who didn't evacuate fast enough. The beast doesn't discriminate. But I calmed you. That means something. It means you're dangerous to yourself." Luke stood abruptly. "We're leaving. Now. The council won't move against you immediately, they'll want to build their case, gather more fabricated evidence. But we don't have much time." "Leaving to where?" "My private study. There are documents there, evidence the High Advisor compiled before his death. If we can prove the council's corruption, we might be able to turn this around." They spent the rest of the day locked in Luke's study, poring over files and documents that painted a damning picture of council dealings. Bribes, treaty violations, territory seizures, it was all there, meticulously documented. But it was a loose page that fell from one of the folders that made Annie's blood run cold. The document was written in elegant script, detailing a ritual. One designed to amplify a curse to fatal levels. And at the bottom, in red ink, were 2 names, Luke and Annie Jason. "They're not just trying to remove you," Annie whispered, showing Luke the page. "They're planning to kill you using my blood. The Evershade bloodline, they know what I am. They're going to use me to make your curse kill you." Luke's face went hard as stone. "Marek. It has to be him. He has connections to witch covens in the north. If he's obtained Morvana's grimoire." He cursed viciously. "He'll trigger an episode during the new moon, when the curse is strongest. Use your blood in a ritual to overwhelm my defenses. I'll tear myself apart from the inside. Then we leave. Tonight. Get out of the palace, go somewhere they can't find us. And abandon the territories to Marek's rule. Let him install a puppet council and undo 2 centuries of peace. Luke shook his head. I won't run. But I will fight. And I need you to promise me something. Annie's throat tightened. What? If the ritual happens. If they manage to use your blood to kill me, you run. You get as far from this place as possible and never look back. Promise me. No. Luke grabbed her shoulders. Annie. No, she repeated, pulling free. I'm not going to promise to abandon you. We're bound, remember. Ward and King. That means I fight beside you, not run away when things get dangerous. You're an untrained healer facing a political coup backed by ancient magic. You'll die. Then I die. But I won't leave you. Annie stepped closer, her hand moving to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her palm, feel the curse humming through him like a living thing. You've spent 2 centuries protecting everyone else. Let someone protect you for once. Luke stared down at her, his expression shifting through a dozen emotions too fast to track. Then, slowly, his hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his heart. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, he said softly. Probably both. His fingers tightened around hers. If you stay, if you really intend to fight beside me, then you need to understand what that means. The episodes will get worse as the new moon approaches. The curse will fight harder. And if your power awakens at the wrong moment, uncontrolled. He didn't finish, but Annie understood. They could both die. Then teach me, Annie said. Help me understand the curse, understand my power. We have 2 weeks until the new moon. That's 2 weeks to prepare. Luke studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 2 weeks. But Annie, if it comes down to choosing between your life and mine, I will choose yours. Even if it means letting Marek win. Understood? Annie wanted to argue, but the fierce protectiveness in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she simply squeezed his hand. Understood. That night, the nightmares were worse than ever. Annie woke to Luke's screams, raw, agonized, inhuman. She ran to his chambers without thinking, finding him on the floor, his body half-shifted, claws tearing gouges in the stone. His eyes blazed pure gold, and blood, phantom blood that smelled real despite being memory, covered him from head to toe. Father, please, he gasped, his voice breaking. Please, I can't stop. Make it stop. Kill me. Please, just kill me. Annie dropped to her knees beside him, her hands finding his face. His skin burned like fever, and she could feel the curse raging through him, a living force trying to tear him apart from the inside. Luke, she said firmly. Luke, look at me. I'm here. You're not there anymore. That's not happening now. His claws swung toward her, and she barely dodged. He didn't recognize her, couldn't recognize anything through the nightmare consuming him. So Annie did the only thing she could think of. She threw herself against his chest, wrapping her arms around him and holding on with all her strength. I'm here, she whispered against his burning skin. You're not alone. I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Come back. Come back to me. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the gold in his eyes flickered. His claws retracted. His breathing steadied. Luke's arms came around her, crushing her against him, and she felt him shaking. "Annie," he breathed, her name a prayer and a curse all at once. "You shouldn't, you can't." "I can. And I will. Every time." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "We're in this together, remember?" Luke's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You're going to get yourself killed. Not if you teach me to survive." He held her gaze for a long moment, then pulled her close again, his forehead resting against hers. 2 weeks, he whispered. 2 weeks to prepare for war. Outside the palace walls, hidden in shadow, assassins watched and waited. The council's patience had limits, and the new moon was coming. War was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. If you're on the edge of your seat wondering what happens next, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Comment below with your predictions. Will Annie's power awaken in time to save Luke, or will Marek's ritual succeed? And if you're rooting for Annie and Luke to survive this political nightmare, drop a like on this chapter. Trust me, Chapter 6 is going to be explosive, literally. You won't want to miss the eclipse awakening. The eclipse started 3 days early. Annie stood at the window of Luke's chambers, watching in horror as the sun began to darken at midday, an astronomical impossibility that could only mean one thing. Magic. Dark, powerful magic that twisted the natural order itself. Behind her, Luke collapsed. She spun around to find him on his knees, his body convulsing, golden light exploding from his eyes with such intensity it burned afterimages into her vision. This wasn't a normal episode. This was something far worse. "Luke." Annie ran to him, but the moment she touched his skin, she recoiled. He was burning, his temperature so high it should have killed him. The curse wasn't just tormenting him, it was consuming him from the inside out. "Marek," Luke gasped, blood trickling from his nose. "He's started the ritual, early. Can't fight." His eyes rolled back, and he went completely still. Annie pressed her fingers to his throat, feeling for a pulse. It was there, but faint, irregular, fading with each passing second. His breathing had stopped entirely. "No," she whispered. "No, you don't get to die. Not now. Not like this." She pressed her hands against his chest, trying to channel whatever power had manifested during the eclipse 2 weeks ago. But nothing happened. Her bloodline remained dormant, useless, while the man who'd protected her slipped away. Unless she went after him. The thought crystallized with sudden, terrible clarity. Luke wasn't just dying, his consciousness was trapped inside the nightmare realm the curse created every night. If she could reach him there, pull him back before the curse destroyed him completely. Annie closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against Luke's chest, and reached deep inside herself. She thought of the bond they'd formed, the way her touch could calm his episodes, the resonance she'd felt between them. That connection had to go both ways. It had to. "Take me to him," she whispered, to the curse, to the magic, to whatever force bound them together. "Take me into his nightmare. Let me share it." Power answered, not her own, but something ancient and hungry. The curse recognized her as Evershade, recognized the opportunity to claim another victim. It pulled her down, down, down into darkness so complete it felt like drowning. When Annie opened her eyes, she stood in a grand hall lit by chandeliers that cast everything in shades of blood and shadow. The architecture was beautiful, soaring columns, intricate carvings, tapestries depicting wolves running beneath full moons. But everything was wrong, twisted, as if seen through a lens of horror and guilt. She heard screaming. Annie ran toward the sound, her feet silent on marble slick with blood. Real blood this time, pooling across the floor in spreading crimson lakes. She burst through massive doors into a throne room, and what she saw there made her stomach turn. Bodies. Dozens of them. Nobles in formal dress, their throats torn out, their eyes wide with terror and betrayal. And in the center of the carnage stood Luke, younger than she'd ever seen him, maybe 30 years old, his face twisted with anguish as he stared down at his blood-soaked hands. "I tried to stop," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Father, I swear I tried to stop. Please believe me. Please." A figure materialized from the shadows, an older man with Luke's sharp features and eyes that held centuries of wisdom. His throat had been torn open, but he still stood, still looked at his son with an expression that combined love and horror in equal measure. "I know, my son," the Phantom said. "But knowing doesn't change what you've done. Doesn't bring us back. Doesn't end your punishment." "Then kill me," Luke begged, falling to his knees. "Please, Father. End this. I can't keep living with what I've done. I can't." "You can't die," a woman's voice echoed through the hall, cold and satisfied. "That's the beauty of my curse, young king. You'll live forever, and every night you'll relive this moment. Every scream. Every drop of blood. Every second of their terror as you murdered them." Annie spun to find the source of the voice. A woman stood on the throne itself, tall and terrible, with black hair that seemed to move like living shadow and eyes that gleamed red. The witch. Morvenna. 2 centuries, the witch continued, her smile cruel. "And still you suffer. Still you beg for death. Still you break a little more each night. It's magnificent." Luke didn't seem to hear her. He was lost in his nightmare, living through the massacre again, trapped in an endless loop of guilt and horror. Annie stepped forward. "He didn't want to kill them. You forced him." The witch's eyes snapped to her, and Annie felt the weight of that gaze like a physical blow. "An Evershade. How delicious. Come to break my curse, little girl. Or to die trying. I came to bring him back. He doesn't want to come back. Look at him." The witch gestured to where Luke knelt among the bodies, his hands covering his face, his entire body shaking. "He's been begging for death for 200 years. The only kindness you could offer him is oblivion. You're wrong." Annie moved toward Luke, ignoring the phantom bodies that reached for her with cold, dead hands. "He's not begging for death. He's begging for forgiveness. There's a difference." She reached Luke and dropped to her knees beside him, her hands finding his blood-soaked ones. "Luke. Look at me." He didn't respond. Didn't even seem to know she was there. "This isn't real," Annie said firmly, gripping his hands tighter. "This is memory. This is guilt. But it's not happening now. You're not that person anymore. You've protected the territories for 2 centuries. You've saved countless lives. You've built peace where there was only war. It doesn't matter," Luke whispered. "Nothing I do will ever wash away their blood." "You're right. It won't." Annie moved closer, until her forehead pressed against his. "But that doesn't mean you deserve to suffer forever. It doesn't mean you can't be forgiven. It doesn't mean you have to carry this alone." Luke's eyes finally focused on her, cold and anguished. "Annie. How are you? You shouldn't be here. The curse will trap you too. I chose to be here. I chose to share this with you." Annie's voice was steady despite the horror surrounding them. You've been alone in this nightmare for 200 years. You don't have to be alone anymore. The witch laughed, the sound echoing through the throne room like breaking glass. Foolish girl. The curse doesn't allow sharing. It only consumes. You'll be trapped here with him, living this massacre over and over until your mind shatters. Then we'll be trapped together. Annie stood, pulling Luke up with her. Around them, the phantom bodies began to move, rising with jerky, unnatural movements. Luke's murdered family, animated by the curse, reaching for them with accusing hands. Son, his father's phantom whispered. Murderer. Monster. How can you ask for forgiveness when you won't even accept your punishment? Luke flinched, but Annie stepped between him and the advancing phantoms. He's accepted it. 200 years of torment every single night, that's more punishment than any crime deserves. It ends now. Power stirred inside her, responding to her conviction. Green-white light began to emanate from her hands, spreading up her arms like living fire. The Evershade bloodline, finally awakening, recognizing what needed to be done. You can't break my curse, the witch snarled, her form growing larger, more terrible. It's woven into his immortality. To break it would kill him. Then I'll take half of it. Annie's voice rang clear. I'll share the burden. His pain becomes mine. His curse becomes ours. And together, we'll be strong enough to survive it. Annie, no. Luke tried to pull her back, but she gripped his hands tighter, green-white light flowing from her into him, binding them together at the deepest level. The curse fought back. The nightmare realm shuddered, phantoms shrieking as they rushed forward. Annie felt claws rake across her back, teeth sink into her shoulder, hands close around her throat. The pain was overwhelming. 200 years of torment compressed into seconds, every nightmare Luke had ever suffered crashing into her mind at once. She screamed, but didn't let go. Luke's arms came around her, his power rising to meet hers, gold and green-white mixing, merging, creating something entirely new. The phantoms began to burn away, their screams fading. The witch's form flickered, destabilizing. Impossible, Morvanna hissed. The Evershade line was destroyed. You can't. I'm right here, Annie gasped through the pain. And I'm not letting him go. The power building between them reached a crescendo. Annie felt something inside the curse, a knot, a binding point, the central spell that held everything together. She dove for it with her consciousness, wrapped her will around it, and pulled. The curse shattered. The nightmare realm exploded in blinding light. Annie felt herself falling, Luke's arms tight around her, both of them tumbling through layers of consciousness and magic until they crashed back into the physical world. Annie gasped, her lungs burning as she dragged in air. She was lying on the floor of Luke's chambers, tangled with him, their bodies pressed together. Luke was breathing, deep, steady breaths. His eyes were open, staring at her with an expression of absolute wonder. You broke it, he whispered. The curse. I can't feel it anymore. The nightmare is gone. Annie tried to speak but found she couldn't. The pain from sharing his torment still echoed through her body, phantom wounds that felt terrifyingly real. Luke seemed to sense it. He pulled her closer, his hand gentle at the back of her head. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you. Breathe. Just breathe. They stayed like that for long minutes, wrapped in each other, both trembling from what they'd just survived. Finally, Annie found her voice. Did it work? Is the curse really? It's still there, Luke said quietly. But it's different. Weaker. The nightmare isn't replaying. For the first time in 2 centuries, I don't see their deaths when I close my eyes. I just see darkness. Peaceful darkness. His voice cracked. How did you do that? I shared it. Your pain, your guilt, your memories. Half of the curse is mine now. Luke pulled back, his eyes wide with horror. No. Annie, no. You can't. That curse was meant to destroy me. If you carry even half of it, then we'll carry it together. And together, it won't destroy either of us. Annie touched his face, feeling the tears on his cheeks. You're not alone anymore, Luke. You never have to be alone in that nightmare again. Luke stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting through disbelief, grief, and something that made her breath catch. Then he pulled her into a kiss that tasted like desperation and gratitude and something far deeper than either. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Luke rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you. Probably not, Annie agreed, managing a weak smile. But you're stuck with me anyway. Ward and King, remember? Not just Ward, Luke said softly. Annie, what we did, binding our souls like that, it's permanent. You're part of me now. I'm part of you. There's no going back. Good, Annie whispered. I don't want to go back. Luke's arms tightened around her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw peace in his eyes. Real, genuine peace. Outside, the false eclipse faded. The sun returned to its normal position, and somewhere in the palace, Alpha Marek screamed in rage as his ritual failed spectacularly. The war was far from over. But for this one moment, wrapped in Luke's arms with half a broken curse humming through her veins, Annie allowed herself to believe they might actually survive it. The attack came at dawn. Annie woke to the sound of explosions, the palace shaking as magical fire erupted throughout the capital. She and Luke were on their feet instantly, moving to the window to see what they'd both known was coming. War. The city burned. Marek's armies poured through breached gates, northern wolves in dark green armor cutting down palace guards with brutal efficiency. But it was the figures on the palace walls that made Annie's blood run cold. Witches in black robes, their hands glowing with crimson light as they cast spells that turned stone to rubble and defenders to ash. He's not even pretending anymore, Luke said grimly, already strapping on his armor. This is open rebellion. He failed to kill you with the curse. Now he'll do it with swords. Annie moved to the weapons rack, pulling down one of the daggers Luke had been teaching her to use. Her hands trembled, but she forced them steady. What do we do? Luke turned to her, and the fierce protectiveness in his eyes made her chest ache. You go to the safe room. There's a passage behind the... No. Annie. We just bound our souls together. If you die, I die. There's no safe room from that. Annie secured the dagger at her waist. We fight together or not at all. Luke looked like he wanted to argue, but another explosion rocked the palace. They were out of time. Stay behind me. Stay close. And if I tell you to run, I won't. Annie met his gaze steadily. Not now. Not ever. Something fierce and possessive flashed across Luke's face. Then he was moving, leading her through corridors filled with smoke and screaming, past nobles fleeing in terror and guards trying desperately to organize a defense. They made it halfway to the throne room before the ambush. Witches materialized from the smoke, 6 of them forming a circle that cut off all escape routes. Annie recognized the spell they were weaving. A binding circle, meant to trap prey while the hunters closed in. Luke shifted partially, his eyes blazing gold, claws extending. Annie, when I break their circle, you run for the throne room. Don't stop. Don't look back. Luke. He lunged before she could finish, moving with terrifying speed. His claws tore through the nearest witch's throat, disrupting the circle long enough for Annie to see an opening. But instead of fleeing, she saw something that made her heart stop. More witches emerging from the smoke. Dozens of them. Too many to fight. And at their center, holding a blade that pulsed with dark magic, stood Alpha Marek. Luke. Annie screamed his name in warning, but Marek was already moving. The blade sliced through the air, and though Luke dodged, the magic reached him anyway. He went down hard, his body convulsing as the spell took hold. The curse. Marek's blade was somehow activating what remained of Luke's curse, using it as a weapon against him. Annie felt it through their bond, the agony, the nightmare trying to claw its way back into his mind. She ran to him, ignoring Marek's triumphant laugh, and pressed her hands against Luke's chest. "Fight it," she gasped. "We broke it before. We can break it again. No breaking this time." Marek's voice was cold as winter. "Grab the girl." Hands seized Annie, yanking her away from Luke. She fought, kicking and biting, but there were too many. They dragged her toward what looked like a hastily constructed altar, black stone carved with symbols that hurt to look at, surrounded by candles that burned with green flame. "The Evershade bloodline," Marek said conversationally as they forced Annie onto the altar, binding her wrists and ankles with chains that burned like ice. "We thought you were all dead. Imagine my surprise when the High Advisor's investigation revealed your existence. A bloodline capable of breaking curses. Or powering them." Annie's eyes widened in horror. "You killed him. You ordered the assassination." "I did. He was going to reveal my plans to Luke before everything was ready." Marek picked up a ceremonial knife, its blade etched with the same painful symbols. "But his death served a greater purpose. It brought you into the palace. Put you right where I needed you." Across the courtyard, Luke fought to rise, his body still racked with curse-induced spasms. Their eyes met, and Annie saw the desperation there, the fury, the absolute determination to reach her. "The ritual is simple," Marek continued, positioning the knife over Annie's chest. "Your Evershade blood, combined with the remnants of Luke's curse, will create a feedback loop. The curse will consume him from the inside while his immortality prevents him from dying quickly. It will take hours. Days, perhaps. Long enough for him to suffer as he's made so many suffer." "You're insane," Annie spat. "I'm practical. Luke's had his time. 2 centuries of iron rule, crushing anyone who dared challenge him. The territories need fresh leadership. They need." The knife descended. Annie screamed, not from pain but from pure, desperate will. Her Evershade power exploded outward in a wave of green-white light that shattered the chains binding her. The knife clattered away, and Marek stumbled back with a curse. But the ritual had already begun. Annie felt her blood responding to the spell, felt it reaching for Luke through their bond, trying to tear him apart from the inside. No. She wouldn't let it. Couldn't let it. Annie pushed herself off the altar, ignoring the witches closing in, and ran to where Luke had collapsed. She fell to her knees beside him, pressing her bleeding wrist to his lips. "Take it," she gasped. "My blood, my power, all of it. It's yours. It's always been yours." Luke's eyes snapped open, pure gold and wild. Annie, what are you? Rewriting the spell. If they want to use my blood in a ritual, then I'm giving it to you willingly. That changes everything. She felt the moment he understood. Felt him make the choice to trust her completely. His mouth closed over her wrist, and power erupted between them. The ritual Marek had designed was meant to force Annie's blood to destroy Luke. But blood freely given, offered in love and trust and absolute faith, that was different. That was ancient magic, older than curses, older than kingdoms. That was the magic of bonds chosen, not forced. Light exploded from them both, gold and green-white merging into something brilliant and terrible. Annie felt the curse inside Luke shatter completely, felt his immortality burn away, felt her own Evershade power transform, adapting, changing to match him. When the light faded, Annie collapsed against Luke's chest, both of them gasping. She could feel the changes. Luke's heartbeat was slower, steadier, mortal. And her own body thrummed with new power, stronger and longer-lived than any human or wolf. They'd become something neither witch nor curse had anticipated. A hybrid. Balanced. Equals. Marek's scream of rage cut through the sudden silence. No. The ritual was perfect. It should have killed him. It should have. He lunged at Annie, his claws extended, murder in his eyes. Luke moved faster. He shifted. Not the careful, controlled shift Annie had seen before, but something complete and primal. His wolf form was massive, midnight black with eyes that blazed like suns. He intercepted Marek mid-lunge, teeth closing around the rival alpha's throat. Annie felt Luke's rage through their bond, felt him preparing to kill, to tear Marek apart for daring to threaten her. The beast in him wanted blood, wanted vengeance. Luke, no. Annie's voice cut through the bloodlust. Don't kill him. He doesn't deserve a quick death. Make him face justice. Make him answer for his crimes before everyone. For a long moment, Luke didn't move. Then, slowly, his jaws opened. Marek collapsed, gasping, defeated but alive. Around them, the remaining witches and northern wolves dropped their weapons. Without their alpha, without their ritual, they had nothing left to fight for. The battle was over. And somehow, impossibly, they'd won.